Amelia had always known that her job was more than just a career. It was a calling. She worked as a social worker at a small shelter for people escaping dangerous situations. Most of her days were spent listening to stories that would break anyone's heart, stories about abuse, neglect, and loss. But what happened with Ethan was different. It wasn't just another case. It was something that would change both their lives forever. It was a cold winter evening when Ethan first walked into the shelter. Amelia had just finished her shift and was getting ready to leave when she saw him. He looked out of place, almost lost. His clothes were worn, his face pale and tired, and there was something in his eyes that made Amelia stop in her tracks. She had seen many people walk through the shelter doors, but his eyes, those eyes were full of fear, like he didn't know where to turn next. Ethan didn't speak at first. He just stood there, unsure of what to do, like a man who had no idea how to ask for help. Amelia approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him, but also not wanting to leave him alone. She smiled softly, the way she always did when meeting someone new, and gently asked if he needed assistance. His response was a simple nod. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice calm but full of concern. He took a deep breath, then hesitated before answering. "I need help," he said quietly, almost as if the words were too hard to say. I can't go home." Amelia's heart sank. She had heard this before many times, but there was something in his voice that told her this wasn't just another story. This was real and it was urgent. She led him to a quiet room where they could talk more privately. He seemed to shrink into the chair, like the weight of everything that had happened was finally too much to bear. As the conversation began, it became clear that Ethan's life had been filled with pain for years. He was married to a woman who controlled him, who manipulated him, who made him feel like he was nothing. The abuse had started small, a harsh word here and there, but over time it grew. It was emotional at first, then physical, and now it had become a constant presence in his life. Ethan had tried to leave before, but each time he was pulled back by guilt, fear, and the hope that things might improve. But this time, something was different. He had reached the breaking point. He couldn't go back. He couldn't live in that prison any longer. Amelia listened without interrupting, letting him speak when he was ready, offering comfort when needed. She could tell this wasn't easy for him, but it was clear that he had made the decision to change his life. Amelia didn't promise him easy answers. She knew that leaving an abusive relationship was never simple. It meant risk. It meant fear. It meant taking the first step towards something uncertain and possibly dangerous. But what she could promise him was that he wasn't alone anymore. He had made it to the shelter, and she would do everything in her power to help him stay safe. Over the next few days, Amelia worked with Ethan to put together a plan. It wasn't just about finding him a place to stay. He needed a whole new life. He needed therapy, a new job, and most importantly, he needed to feel like he had control over his own future. Amelia arranged for him to stay in a temporary place away from his wife's reach, and they began the process of building a life for him from the ground up. The more time Amelia spent with Ethan, the more she learned about his struggles. He was a quiet man, not used to asking for help or speaking about his feelings. He had been taught his entire life to be strong, to keep his emotions hidden. But here in the safety of the shelter, he could finally begin to heal. As the days passed, Amelia saw a side of Ethan that he rarely showed anyone. He was kind, thoughtful, and determined. Despite everything he had been through, there was a spark in him that refused to die. He had hope, even if it was buried deep inside him. Their conversations grew more personal over time. Amelia found herself drawn to him, not just as a client, but as a person. She admired his strength, his quiet resilience, and though she tried to push away any feelings that might complicate things, there was no denying that she felt a connection to him. Ethan, too, began to trust Amelia more. It wasn't easy for him to open up, but he felt safe with her. He started sharing more about his past, the things he had kept hidden for so long. He told her about his childhood, his dreams, and the ways he had tried to be a good husband, even when everything seemed stacked against him. He wasn't proud of the man he had been in that marriage, but he was determined to be different now. Amelia knew that helping him wasn't just about getting him out of an abusive relationship. It was about helping him rebuild his identity, to rediscover who he was outside of the pain and the shame he had carried for so long. And it wasn't going to be easy. She had seen countless people come through the shelter, only to struggle with the aftermath of their pasts. But there was something in Ethan that made her believe he could make it. He was strong, even if he didn't know it yet. As the weeks went by, Ethan made incredible progress. He started going to therapy, and though it was difficult at first, he slowly began to face the deep wounds from his past. Amelia checked in with him regularly, making sure he had everything he needed, but she also gave him the space to heal on his own terms. But there was always a question that lingered in the back of her mind. Did she truly understand what Ethan had been through? She had seen the scars, the brokenness, but she couldn't know the full extent of his pain. She was there to help, but she couldn't pretend to know what it felt like to be trapped in a marriage like his, to live in constant fear and manipulation. One day, after a particularly hard therapy session, Ethan came to Amelia, his eyes filled with tears. For the first time since he had arrived, he let down his guard completely. "I don't know how to move on," he admitted, his voice cracking. "Everything feels so impossible." Amelia reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone," she said softly. "We'll figure this out one step at a time." That was the moment everything shifted. Ethan wasn't just a man trying to escape his past. He was a man who was willing to fight for his future. And Amelia wasn't just his social worker. She was someone who believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. Though they both knew the journey ahead would be long and difficult, Amelia and Ethan were ready to take the next step together. It wasn't just about escaping the past anymore, it was about creating a new future. And no matter what it took, they would face it side by side. As the weeks passed, Ethan began to settle into his new life. He was living in a small apartment arranged by the shelter, far from the town where his wife could find him. Every day felt like a new chapter, one where he was slowly but surely finding his way back to himself. Yet despite all the progress, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still trapped in some way. He had escaped physically, but emotionally and mentally, the scars from his past still clung to him. Amelia noticed the subtle changes in him. He was quieter now, not as withdrawn, but there was something different. She could tell that he was struggling, even if he didn't say it aloud. He had begun attending therapy regularly, but the process of healing wasn't linear. Some days were good, and others were harder than he could have imagined. The nightmares, the lingering self-doubt, the fear that he might slip back into old patterns, it all still haunted him. One day, Ethan walked into the shelter's office, looking more anxious than usual. He was carrying a stack of papers in his hands, and his usual calm demeanor seemed to be replaced by unease. Amelia greeted him with a warm smile, but she immediately noticed the tension in his posture. "Hey, what's going on?" she asked gently, standing up to meet him. She could see that he was carrying something heavy, and it wasn't just the papers. Ethan let out a deep breath and sat down at the desk. He looked at the papers, then back at Amelia, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and uncertainty. I got a job offer," he said slowly, as if testing the words before fully committing to them. Amelia's heart leapt with excitement for him. This was a huge step, one she knew he'd been working toward for months. "That's amazing, Ethan. This is exactly what you've been working for." He nodded, but there was no smile. "Yeah, but I don't know if I can do it. What if I mess up? What if I fail?" The weight of his fear was palpable. For a moment, Amelia didn't know how to respond. She had seen this kind of hesitation before. People who had been broken by their pasts and weren't sure if they could ever be whole again. But she also knew that he was stronger than he thought. "You won't mess up," she said firmly. "You've been through so much and you've come so far. This job is just another step in your journey. You're ready for this, Ethan." He looked at her, and for a second it felt like he was searching for something in her eyes. It wasn't just reassurance. It was a sense of belief, something he had been lacking for so long. "Amelia," he said, his voice low, "I don't know if I can keep moving forward. The fear, it's always there. It's like I'm stuck." Amelia could see the pain in his eyes, and she knew he wasn't just talking about the job. He was talking about everything. The past that continued to haunt him, the future that felt uncertain, and the constant battle within himself to believe that he deserved more. "Fear is normal. Ethan," she said, her voice soft but strong, "you don't have to have all the answers right now. But you do have the strength to take that first step. Every journey starts with one small step, and I'm here to help you every step of the way." He looked at her, and this time there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He stood up, still uncertain, but with a decision forming in his mind. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll take it. I'll give it a try." The next few weeks were a blur of new routines for Ethan. He started his job in a small office doing paperwork for a local nonprofit. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was a start. And for Ethan, it felt like the first real step in taking back control of his life. He was nervous at first, always second-guessing himself, but little by little he began to grow more comfortable. He made friends with his co-workers, people who didn't know his past and treated him just like anyone else. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Amelia checked in with him regularly, making sure that everything was going smoothly. She could see the change in him. The shift from someone who had once been completely broken to someone who was beginning to piece his life back together. But as much as he was progressing, she knew that the emotional side of healing was much more complicated. Ethan still had moments where the darkness would creep back in, moments when the weight of his past would drag him under. He'd sometimes retreat into himself, unable to shake the feelings of inadequacy and shame that had been ingrained in him for so long. Amelia could see these moments, and she understood them. But she also knew that healing wasn't a straight path. It was okay to have setbacks. It didn't mean he wasn't making progress. One afternoon, Ethan called Amelia. His voice was tense, and there was a hint of panic in it. "Amelia, I don't know what to do. Something happened at work." Her heart sank. She could hear the worry in his voice. "What happened? Are you okay?" I froze, he admitted. "I had to give a presentation and I completely blanked out. I couldn't speak. I felt like I was choking. I don't know what's wrong with me." Amelia's first instinct was to reassure him. "It's okay, Ethan. Everyone has moments like that. You're doing great. Don't be too hard on yourself." But she also knew that Ethan was grappling with something deeper. The presentation had triggered something, perhaps an old fear of failure, a fear that he wasn't good enough. She could hear the desperation in his voice as he asked, "What if I'm just not cut out for this? What if I can never do it?" "Listen to me," Amelia said gently but firmly. "You are doing it. Every day you're doing it. You're pushing through your fear, and that takes courage. Don't let one setback define you. You're not alone in this, and you don't have to be perfect." For the next few days, Ethan withdrew into himself. He didn't answer her calls, and he avoided the shelter. Amelia gave him space, knowing that pushing him too hard wouldn't help. She continued to check in, leaving messages of support, but she didn't want to force him to talk if he wasn't ready. Then, one day, he showed up at the shelter, looking tired but determined. He sat down next to Amelia and, for the first time in days, actually smiled. "I went back to work," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It was hard, but I did it." Amelia's heart swelled with pride. "I knew you would. You're stronger than you think, Ethan." "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "Some days it still feels like I'm not good enough, but I'm trying." And that's when Amelia realized something important. Healing wasn't about fixing him, about making him whole in a way that others might expect. It was about him finding his own strength, his own path. It was about learning to live with the past, but not allowing it to define him. Ethan was still healing, still struggling, but he was moving forward. And that in itself was a victory. Ethan was beginning to settle into his new routine. The anxiety he had once felt every morning was starting to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. His work, while still challenging, had become a place where he could grow, a space where he didn't feel judged by his past. The people at his job treated him with respect, and he slowly started to realize that he wasn't the broken man he thought he was. He had value, he had potential. Yet despite all the progress he had made, there were moments when the weight of his past would come crashing back. It was like a shadow that would creep up on him unexpectedly, reminding him of the man he used to be, the man who had felt trapped and powerless. These moments were hard to shake, but he was learning to push through them. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Ethan sat in his small apartment, staring at the walls. He had been so focused on his job and the practical aspects of rebuilding his life that he hadn't really thought about his personal life in months. The quiet that surrounded him was comforting but also lonely. He missed having someone to talk to, someone who truly understood him. He missed the kind of companionship that didn't come with expectations or judgment. That's when he realized how much he had come to rely on Amelia. She had been his lifeline during the hardest moments of his life. She had been there for him when no one else had. And while he appreciated everything she had done for him, he found himself thinking about her in ways he hadn't expected. He couldn't deny it any longer. He had feelings for her. The realization was both exciting and terrifying. Ethan had spent so much time focusing on his own survival, on escaping his past, that he hadn't allowed himself to imagine a future with someone else. And yet, here he was, considering a future with Amelia. He knew he wasn't ready to jump into anything serious, but the feelings were undeniable. He wondered if she might feel the same way. The next time they met, Amelia could sense something was different about Ethan. He wasn't his usual quiet self. There was a nervous energy about him, a hint of something unspoken. As they sat together in the cafe, he fidgeted with his cup, avoiding her gaze. "Is everything okay?" Amelia asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. Ethan hesitated for a moment before meeting her eyes. I've been thinking a lot about things," he said slowly. "About how much you've helped me, how much you've been there for me." Amelia smiled gently. "I'm just glad I could help." "No, it's more than that," Ethan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't just see you as someone who's helped me. I care about you, Amelia, more than just as a friend." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that Ethan cared for her, but hearing him say it out loud was something else entirely. It was a moment of honesty, one that neither of them had expected. She had always been careful not to cross any boundaries, but now, in this quiet moment, she felt a shift. She felt the same way. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been feeling the same, but I don't want to complicate things. You've been through so much. You've come so far. I don't want to be something that holds you back." Ethan reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. "You won't hold me back, Amelia. I know what I'm feeling. I'm not saying we need to figure everything out right now, but I want you to know that I care about you, and I'm willing to see where this goes if you are." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, her mind racing. She had always kept things professional, focused on helping him heal. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she realized that healing didn't mean closing herself off to the possibility of love. It meant embracing the future even if it was uncertain. "I think I'd like that," she said quietly, "but we need to take it slow. There's no rush." Ethan nodded, a smile spreading across his face. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. "I can do slow. I don't want to mess this up." As they spent more time together, their connection grew stronger. They went on long walks, talked late into the night, and slowly began to navigate what it meant to be more than just a social worker and her client. They shared their fears, their dreams, and the things they had learned about themselves along the way. For the first time, Ethan felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was living. But despite the deepening connection, there were still moments when Ethan questioned himself. Could he really be the man Amelia deserved? Could he give her the love and stability she had always shown him? These thoughts lingered in the back of his mind, especially when he saw her go about her work with such passion and dedication. She had so much to offer, and he worried that his past would be a burden on their relationship. One evening, after a particularly difficult therapy session, Ethan called Amelia. His voice was shaky and he struggled to find the right words. "Amelia, I don't know if I'm ready for this," he admitted. "I feel like I'm still broken, like there's so much I haven't worked through. What if I hurt you?" Amelia listened patiently, her heart aching for him. She knew how hard it was for him to admit these things, how deeply his insecurities ran. But she also knew that healing wasn't about being perfect. It was about being vulnerable, about trusting each other with the messy parts of who we are. "Ethan," she said softly, "nobody's perfect. We all have our struggles. What matters is that we're here for each other, through the good and the bad. I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be you. And I'm here every step of the way." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Ethan's voice broke through, softer now, more at ease. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." Amelia smiled, her heart swelling with affection. "You won't have to find out." As the days went on, their relationship continued to grow. They took things slowly, navigating the complexities of both their pasts and their evolving feelings for each other. There were moments of doubt, moments when Ethan would pull back, afraid that he wasn't enough. But each time Amelia was there, reassuring him that he was more than enough. Ethan's confidence began to grow, not just in their relationship but in himself. He started taking more risks, tackling challenges at work with a newfound sense of purpose. He had always been afraid of failure, but now he was beginning to realize that failure wasn't the end. It was part of the process of growth. And with Amelia by his side, he felt like he could face anything. Their love wasn't rushed or perfect, but it was real. It was built on trust, patience, and a shared understanding that both of them were still healing. And that, in its own way, made their bond even stronger. Ethan knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt. But he also knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had found someone who saw him for who he truly was, who believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. And that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. As time passed, Ethan and Amelia continued to build something real. Their bond had grown stronger with each day, but both knew that their relationship was far from perfect. They had come from different worlds, and each of them was still learning how to navigate the delicate balance between healing and moving forward. They supported each other, but the journey wasn't without its challenges. Ethan's past was something that he couldn't completely leave behind. It was like a shadow that followed him wherever he went, sometimes surfacing at the most unexpected times. Even as he was growing more confident in his work and his personal life, the weight of his past mistakes and fears would sometimes become overwhelming. One evening, after a long day at work, Ethan sat on the couch staring out the window. The night was quiet, but his mind was anything but. He had been invited to attend a work event, a casual dinner with some of his colleagues. It seemed like a simple enough invitation, but for Ethan it felt like a huge step. Social situations had always been a challenge for him, and the idea of being around people who didn't know his past made him uneasy. Amelia could see the unease in his eyes when she arrived at his apartment. She had stopped by to check in on him, as she often did after a long day, but tonight was different. She noticed that Ethan seemed distant, lost in thought. "Are you okay?" she asked, sitting down beside him on the couch. "You seem a little off tonight." Ethan turned to her, his face filled with uncertainty. "I've been invited to a work event tonight," he said slowly. "It's just dinner with some colleagues, but I don't know if I can do it." "I don't know how to be around people like that." Amelia took a deep breath, trying to understand where he was coming from. She knew that Ethan had never fully embraced social situations, but she also knew that he had made so much progress. This dinner wasn't just a casual invitation, it was a sign of how far he had come, and she wanted to be there for him. "Ethan, you don't have to do anything you're not ready for," she said gently. "But I also think this is an opportunity for you to show yourself how far you've come. You've been doing so well, and I think you can handle it, but only if you feel comfortable." Ethan sat quietly for a moment, contemplating her words. He appreciated her support, but the fear still lingered. What if he said the wrong thing? What if people noticed how uncomfortable he was? He had spent so much of his life hiding his true self, pretending to be someone he wasn't, that the thought of revealing himself in a social setting felt terrifying. "I don't know if I can just be normal," Ethan said, his voice soft. "I don't know how to be around people who don't know what I've been through. They don't know the real me." Amelia reached out and gently placed her hand on his. "You are the real you, Ethan. You're not defined by your past. And the people at your work event, they're just people. They'll see you for who you are now, not who you used to be. You don't have to hide anything." For a long moment, Ethan simply stared at her, searching for the courage to believe what she was saying. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust that he was more than just his past. But the doubt, the fear, it was still there. "I'm scared, Amelia," he admitted. "What if they don't like me? What if they don't understand?" Amelia smiled softly, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "You don't need their approval, Ethan. The only person's approval you need is your own. And I think you've come a long way. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to be yourself." Ethan nodded slowly, taking in her words. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the event, but he knew that Amelia believed in him, and that belief gave him a little more strength. That night, Ethan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt for the 5th time. He felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. Was he really ready for this? Could he handle being around people who didn't know his history? What would they think of him if they found out the truth? He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He knew that he had made progress. He had a new job, he had started to rebuild his life, and he had Amelia. That was enough to remind him that he was more than his past. When he arrived at the event, he was nervous but determined. He took a deep breath and walked into the restaurant where his colleagues were already gathered. They greeted him warmly, and he found himself slipping into the conversation more easily than he expected. There were moments of discomfort, sure, but they were brief. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that shelter months ago. He was a man who had fought for his future and was starting to feel like he deserved it. As the night went on, Ethan found himself laughing and engaging with the people around him. He wasn't perfect and he didn't have all the answers, but he was finally starting to feel like he belonged. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just hiding from the world. He was living in it. When the evening ended, Ethan left the restaurant feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had done it. He had faced his fear and stepped into a new chapter of his life. And he realized that it wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, being present, and embracing the opportunities that came his way. The next day, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the event. He was proud of himself, but a part of him still felt uncertain. What if it wasn't enough? What if he was still broken, still not worthy of the life he was building? But as the days went by, Ethan started to realize something important. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. He was no longer letting fear control his life. He was embracing his future, even if it wasn't perfect. He was learning to let go of the past and accept the man he had become. And through it all, Amelia was there by his side. She was his anchor, his support, and the person who reminded him every day that he was enough. She had helped him see that his worth wasn't defined by his mistakes or his past. It was defined by the man he was becoming. One evening, after another successful week at work, Ethan and Amelia sat on the couch together, enjoying the quiet. It was in moments like these that Ethan realized how far he had come. He had found something that he hadn't believed was possible: peace. Peace with himself, with his past, and with the future he was building. "I think I'm starting to get it," Ethan said quietly, looking at Amelia. "I'm not broken. I'm just me, and that's enough." Amelia smiled, her eyes full of warmth. "Yes, it is. You're enough, Ethan. Always have been." And as they sat there, side by side, Ethan realized that the journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more fears to face. But he wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time, he believed that he could handle whatever came next. Ethan's life had come a long way since the first day he walked into the shelter. Each day had brought new challenges, but also new victories. He had faced fear, doubt, and the weight of his past, yet he had emerged stronger. His journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't over. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly living. In the months that followed, Ethan and Amelia's relationship grew. What had started as a connection built on trust and support slowly turned into something deeper. They had always cared for each other, but now it was different. It wasn't just about healing from the past, it was about building a future together. Ethan had never imagined he would find love after everything he had been through. But with Amelia, it felt like a dream he could finally hold on to. They spent more time together, going on walks, sharing meals, and talking about everything and nothing. Ethan had never had a relationship like this before. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They didn't need to hide their fears or insecurities from each other. They had built something based on mutual respect, trust, and the understanding that both of them were still growing. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of their apartment, Ethan found himself staring at Amelia. There was a peace about her that he admired, a strength that grounded him even on the hardest days. He had come so far, but he knew that it was her love and support that had helped him get there. "Amelia," he said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I've been thinking a lot about us." Amelia turned to him, her expression calm but curious. "What about us?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. "I don't know how I ever thought I didn't deserve this," he said, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "I've been through so much, and I thought that was all I'd ever be. But you've shown me a different way. You've shown me that I'm worth something, that I'm worthy of love, of happiness." Amelia reached out, taking his hand in hers. She had seen the pain in his eyes when they first met, the uncertainty and fear that had controlled his life for so long. And now, looking at him, she could see the change, the man he had become. He was strong, Not because he was without flaws, but because he had faced his fears and embraced his future. "You've always been worthy of love, Ethan," she said quietly. "You just needed to see it in yourself." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. He had never thought he would feel this way again, but with Amelia by his side, he had learned to believe in himself. He had learned to trust not only her but himself as well. And that trust was the foundation of everything they had built together. A few weeks later, Ethan found himself at another crossroads. He had been offered a promotion at work, a big opportunity that could change the course of his career. It was something he had dreamed about, but now that it was right in front of him, he was filled with doubt. Could he handle the responsibility? Was he ready for such a big step? The weight of the decision pressed down on him, and he found himself turning to Amelia for guidance. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, Ethan shared his thoughts. "Amelia, I don't know if I'm ready for this," he admitted, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. "This promotion, it's everything I've worked for, but what if I mess it up? What if I fail?" Amelia listened quietly, her eyes full of understanding. She knew how hard it was for Ethan to take risks, especially when it came to something that felt so important. She had watched him grow from a man who was afraid to even take a small step into someone who was starting to believe in his own potential, and now she could see that he was on the edge of something big. "You don't have to be perfect, Ethan," she said gently. "You've already proven that you're more than capable. This is just another step in your journey. It's okay to be scared, but you're stronger than you think, and no matter what happens, you're not alone." Her words brought him a sense of calm, but the doubt still lingered. Ethan had spent most of his life running from failure, but he had learned something over the past few months. Failure wasn't the end. It was part of the process of growth. The real failure was in not trying at all. The next day, Ethan made his decision. He accepted the promotion. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when he still felt uncertain, but he knew that this was his chance to prove to himself that he could handle it. It wasn't just about the promotion. It was about the belief in himself that he had been working so hard to build. In the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself thriving in his new role. It was challenging, but he was more than capable. He leaned into his fears instead of running from them, and with each challenge he faced, he grew more confident. His colleagues respected him, and he began to realize that he had a place in this world, a place where he could make a difference. Through it all, Amelia remained by his side. She had always believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And now, as they celebrated his success, he realized that their journey wasn't just about surviving, it was about living together. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, Ethan turned to Amelia. "I never imagined I'd be here," he said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd be able to look back at everything and see how far I've come." Amelia smiled, her hand resting on his. "I always knew you could. You've always had it in you, Ethan." Ethan paused for a moment, his heart full of gratitude. He had never felt so at peace with himself, with his past, and with the future that awaited him. He had come a long way, but the journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more fears to face, but now he knew that he could handle them. He wasn't alone anymore. He had found something worth fighting for, someone worth fighting for. And as he looked at Amelia, the woman who had believed in him when no one else had, he knew that together, they could face whatever came next. They had built something strong, something real, and that was enough. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "Thank you for everything." Amelia looked at him, her eyes soft and filled with love. "You don't have to thank me, Ethan. This is your journey and you've made it. I'm just happy to be a part of it." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan realized that the future, once filled with uncertainty, now looked bright. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about living fully, with hope, with love, and with the belief that no matter what happened, he was ready to face it. And with Amelia by his side, he knew that they could build a life that was everything he had ever dreamed of. Ethan had been through so much, but in the quiet moments he felt something he hadn't known in years. Peace. It wasn't a perfect peace, and it didn't mean his past had disappeared, but it was real. He had learned to accept himself, to trust in the man he had become, and to look forward to the future with hope. And now, with Amelia by his side, he had a sense of stability and love that he had never thought possible. Life wasn't without its challenges. Every day brought new hurdles, but Ethan had learned how to navigate them. He had built a strong foundation in his career, and while he still doubted himself at times, he knew he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. He had come a long way from the man who had once felt trapped in his own life. Now he was forging a path towards something better, but despite everything he had accomplished, there was still something inside of him that felt unsettled. His relationship with Amelia had been growing stronger every day, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't truly faced everything from his past. The memories, the unresolved emotions, they still lingered in the back of his mind. He had worked so hard to move forward, but there was a part of him that still felt like he was carrying something heavy. One evening, after a particularly tough day at work, Ethan found himself sitting alone in his apartment. He had a lot on his mind: questions, doubts, fears. He had been feeling the weight of responsibility at work, and it was starting to take its toll on him. Despite the progress he had made, he still didn't feel completely at ease. He still hadn't confronted everything from his past, and it was beginning to affect him more than he cared to admit. Amelia had noticed the change in him. She could see the way he had started to withdraw, the quiet moments where his thoughts seemed to pull him away from everything around him. She had been there for him through so much, but now, she could sense that something was different. He wasn't the same man he had been when they first met, but there was still a shadow that lingered over him. She decided to confront it head-on, even if it meant having a difficult conversation. She arrived at his apartment that evening, and when she saw him sitting there in silence, she knew something was off. Without saying a word, she sat down next to him, her presence a quiet comfort. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan stared out the window, lost in his thoughts, while Amelia simply sat beside him, offering him the space he needed. Finally, she broke the silence. "Ethan, what's going on? I can feel that something's bothering you. I've seen the way you've been lately." Ethan turned to look at her, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a wave of vulnerability. He didn't want to admit it, didn't want to face it, but he knew that he had to. Amelia had always been there for him, and it was time for him to open up to her in a way he hadn't before. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "I feel like I'm still holding on to something from my past. I've tried to move forward, but there's this part of me that's still stuck. And I don't know if I can be the man you deserve if I'm still carrying this." Amelia's heart ached for him. She knew how hard it had been for him to open up, but she also knew that he was stronger than he gave himself credit for. She reached out and gently took his hand, offering him the same reassurance she had given him from the very beginning. "Ethan, you don't have to be perfect," she said softly. "You don't have to have all the answers. You've already come so far, and you've done it by facing your fears. But that doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. If something's weighing on you, you don't have to carry it by yourself. We can face it together." Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude. He had spent so long trying to be strong on his own, thinking that he had to do everything by himself. But now with Amelia, he realized that he didn't have to. He wasn't alone anymore. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I'm scared that no matter how much I change, I'll always be haunted by my past. I don't know if I can ever fully let go of it." Amelia squeezed his hand, her voice full of understanding. "You don't have to let go of everything. Your past is part of who you are, but it doesn't define you. It's just a chapter in your story. You can't erase it, but you can learn from it. And you can choose to move forward even if it's hard." Ethan's eyes welled up with tears. He had never allowed himself to be this vulnerable before. Never let anyone see the pain that he had buried deep inside for so long. But with Amelia, he felt like he could finally let go. He could finally face the darkness that had always followed him. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Amelia smiled gently, her thumb brushing over his hand. "You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to take the next step, and I'll be right here beside you." For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of relief. The weight that had been pressing down on him didn't disappear, but it felt lighter now. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that he wasn't alone. He had Amelia, and together, they could face whatever came next. The following weeks were a time of reflection and growth for Ethan. He took a step back from his work and allowed himself to really focus on healing. He spent more time with Amelia, talking through the things that had been haunting him. He began to realize that he had been holding on to the pain of his past because he didn't know how to let go. But with Amelia's support, he started to face those memories head-on, allowing himself to process them in a healthy way. Through therapy and self-reflection, Ethan slowly began to heal. He realized that he had been carrying the weight of his past for so long that he had never truly given himself the chance to breathe. But now, with each passing day, he was learning to let go of the shame and guilt that had once defined him. And through it all, Amelia was there. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't expect him to either, but she was patient. She was supportive. And most importantly, she was present. She had always believed in him, and now she was helping him believe in himself. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, Ethan looked at Amelia, his heart full of gratitude. He had come so far, but he knew that he couldn't have done it without her. He had always thought he had to fight his battles alone, but now he realized that he didn't. He had someone who truly saw him, someone who believed in him no matter what. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. Amelia smiled, her eyes soft with love. "You don't have to deserve me, Ethan. You're more than enough just the way you are." And in that moment, Ethan realized something that he had never fully understood before. He was enough. He had always been enough, and with Amelia by his side, he knew that he could face anything. Together they had built something real, something worth fighting for, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew that they would face them together. As the months went by, Ethan and Amelia's connection deepened. They had shared so many moments, both big and small, and each one seemed to weave them closer together. Ethan had come so far from the man he had once been, and as he continued to heal, he found himself able to embrace more of life. His career was progressing, and with Amelia's support, he had learned how to handle the weight of responsibility that came with his success. But despite all the progress he had made, Ethan still carried a quiet fear inside him, a fear that things could fall apart, that he wasn't truly as strong as he wanted to believe. There were days when the fear of failure crept in, when he felt like the life he was building was fragile, like it could slip away at any moment. One evening, as he and Amelia were sitting on the balcony of their apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Ethan spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for something to go wrong," he admitted, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "Like everything's too good and I'm afraid I'm not really in control. I'm just waiting for it all to fall apart." Amelia, who had been quietly watching the night sky, turned to him, sensing the unease in his words. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the railing as if he was holding on to something that might slip away. "You've been through so much, Ethan," she said gently, reaching out to place a hand on his. "I know it's hard to trust that everything will be okay after everything you've experienced. But you've come so far. You've built a life for yourself, and you're stronger than you think." Ethan glanced at her, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "I want to believe that. But sometimes it's hard. I keep thinking about everything I've lost, everything I've had to fight for, and I wonder if I deserve all of this." Amelia's heart ached for him. She knew how much he had struggled, how hard he had fought to be where he was. He was so much stronger than he realized, but his past still had a way of haunting him. She squeezed his hand, her voice steady and comforting. "Ethan, you deserve this. You deserve all the good things in your life because you've worked for them. You've earned it. And I'm here with you, through every fear, every doubt. You don't have to carry it all alone." Her words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan allowed himself to relax. He took a deep breath, letting the weight of his worries slowly lift. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with Amelia by his side, he felt like he could face anything. The next few days passed in a blur of work and personal reflection. Ethan continued to excel at his job, and his confidence grew with each challenge he overcame. He had started to believe that his past didn't define him, and that he was capable of building the life he had always dreamed of. But just when he thought he had gained some stability, something unexpected happened. One morning, as he was preparing for an important meeting at work, he received a call from an old friend. It was someone from his past, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. The voice on the other end of the line brought back memories he had buried deep within himself. "Ethan, it's been a while," the voice said, sounding hesitant but familiar. "I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear, but I think we need to talk." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He hadn't heard from this person in years, and their relationship had ended on a sour note. The thought of revisiting that chapter of his life made him uneasy, but there was a part of him that couldn't ignore the call. He didn't know if he was ready to confront the past, but he knew he couldn't keep running from it either. He told Amelia about the call later that evening, his mind still racing with the implications. He was nervous, unsure of how to handle the situation. Amelia listened intently, her expression soft with understanding. "I think you should talk to them," she said carefully. "Not for them, but for you. You've made so much progress, Ethan. And if you're ready to face your past, this could be the moment that gives you the closure you need." Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready to face the ghosts of his past, but he knew Amelia was right. It wasn't about the other person. It was about him. He needed to take control of his own narrative, to confront the things that had held him back for so long. The next day, he agreed to meet with his old friend. The meeting was set for a small cafe on the edge of town. When Ethan arrived, his heart was pounding in his chest. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. As he walked into the cafe, he spotted his old friend sitting at a corner table, looking just as nervous as he felt. Their eyes met, and for a moment it felt like no time had passed at all. But the years between them were impossible to ignore, and the tension in the air was palpable. "Hey," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "It's been a long time." "Yeah, it has," his friend replied, a hint of regret in their voice. "I didn't know if you'd want to talk. I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened between us." Ethan sat down across from them, taking a deep breath. He wasn't sure what he expected from this conversation, but he knew that he had to let go of the resentment and pain that had built up over the years. "I don't know what you want from me," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "But I'm here to listen. We can't change the past, but I think we both need to move on from it." The conversation was long and difficult, filled with moments of discomfort and raw honesty. As they spoke, Ethan realized something important. He didn't need this person's approval or apology to move forward. He had already forgiven himself for what had happened, and he had built a life for himself that he was proud of. By the end of the conversation, there was a sense of closure. It wasn't the resolution he had imagined, but it was enough. He had faced his past, and in doing so, he had taken another step toward healing. When he returned home that evening, he felt a sense of relief he hadn't expected. The weight of the conversation still hung in the air, but it no longer felt like a burden. He had faced something that had once haunted him, and now he was free to move forward. Amelia was waiting for him when he walked through the door. She could see the change in his demeanor, the way his shoulders seemed to relax, the weight that had lifted from his chest. He smiled at her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I did it," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I faced it. I let it go." Amelia's face lit up with pride. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You're amazing." As they stood there in the quiet of their apartment, Ethan realized that he had truly let go of the past. And with Amelia by his side, he knew that he was ready for whatever came next. They had both been through so much, but together, they had built something beautiful. Their love was strong, grounded in trust, understanding, and a shared belief in the future. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew they would face them together.